has studied the changing attitudes towards the death penalty and looks at how public attitudes impacted legal and legislative decisions. This sets the stage for Megan Glassner's examination of religious rhetoric during World War II and how it was embraced by political administrations. And then we will have Sean Ray, whose paper, Who's Right is what I think the best title. I can't say it, but it's the best title. And he traces responses of two opposing groups to one another, thinking about how that combative dynamic affected the language of abortion. And then finally, we have Jack Envalis, who will be discussing perception and practice from a different angle, leading us through what he calls a reevaluation of media roles under Ronald Reagan, and the ways in which ideas were turned into interventions in Latin America. So I'll hand it over to Elyse, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Jimmy Wilson, an African-American man, was illiterate and poor. In 1957, he was sentenced to death by an all-white jury for stealing $1.95 from an elderly white woman. $1.95. This is the value our courts placed on a human being. In the 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers were the first people to question the morality of capital punishment. These doubts quickly traveled to America, where death penalty reform spread throughout the nascent nation. Is capital punishment deterring crime? Is it healing the families of murder victims? Is it bringing justice to those who have committed the most heinous of crimes? The answers turned out to be no. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss the decline of public support in the 20th century, the long-term and immediate causes of the decline, and then its significance. Capital punishment is so complex in that it must be examined from a legal, moral, and political point of view. I was fascinated with how we as Americans view this practice, and our opinion of it is telling of our attitudes toward the criminal justice system, toward discrimination, and toward each other. With the exception of 1 year, the majority of Americans have supported capital punishment. But what happened in 1966, the only year in American history in which more people have been against the death penalty than in favor of it? As you can see on the graph, the trend toward public opposition to the death penalty started in the early 1950s, but reached maximum disapproval in 1966. So what caused this dramatic decline that took place in the 50s and 60s? We can break up the analysis into a long-term cause and a short-term immediate cause. With regards to the long-term trend, increasing media and academic attention led to the American public's greater awareness of issues surrounding capital punishment. In the 50s and 60s, numerous prominent people attracted global media attention to death penalty issues. The most famous of these examples was death row convict Carol Chessman. The press was enamored by Chessman, who became an international crime celebrity and received support from Marlon Brando and Eleanor Roosevelt. Capital punishment cases such as Chessman's and Jimmy Wilson's, the $1.95 case, raised criticism of American capital punishment from all over the world. They brought much needed attention to a topic that would stir up huge debates over morality and the purpose of the United States legal system. The changes that immediately caused the majority of Americans to oppose the death penalty grew from the civil rights movement. Major organizations such as the ACLU and the NAACP focused on the death penalty to show racism exposed by the civil rights movement. However, in court, their race-based arguments did not have much success in abolishing capital punishment. Instead, they turned to a tactic known as the moratorium strategy based on the Eighth Amendment. Lawyers appealed every capital sentence and built up a tremendous backlog of death row prisoners that brought executions to a halt. Thus, the Supreme Court was forced to take a closer look at the practice of capital punishment. And more importantly, some justices cited public opinion as a reason to abolish the death penalty, indicating that the decline in support demonstrated evolving standards of decency. As the laws regarding segregation were changing, the public looked to these court cases and believed that so too must the practice of the death penalty. The legal battles waged by prominent lawyers created a popular sense that the United States practice a decision to maintain or abolish capital punishment served as a window to American law. Capital punishment became symbolic of our nation's values, showing that our race bias, class bias, gender bias has unjustly taken the lives of so many Americans. tide of public opinion provided the leverage needed for the Supreme Court justices to reevaluate previous interpretations of the Constitution. What had been a standard practice suddenly became outdated and even barbaric. The Supreme Court placed an unprecedented 10-year moratorium on the death penalty from 1967 to 1977 that forced every state to address and revise its laws in an effort to guard against cruel and unusual punishment. However, the current practice is replete with paradoxes. The United States prides itself as the land of human rights, yet it is essentially the only Western nation to still practice capital punishment. We use the death penalty as the ultimate punishment, yet we have taken every measure possible to ensure its painlessness. Proponents claim that the death penalty deters crime, yet no studies have successfully shown its effectiveness in decreasing crime rates. As you may know, Governor Newsom instituted a moratorium on the California death penalty in March of this year. 20 states have abolished or imposed a moratorium on the death penalty, and this number will continue to rise as more people speak out against it. Out of the lessons we have gained from the changing views on capital punishment, perhaps the most important one is the Supreme Court's consideration of public opinion. Civic society that debates and explores important issues is integral to changing and progressing the world around us. Thank you.